On January 31, 2025, President Donald Trump held a press briefing at the White House where he announced the immediate implementation of significant tariffs on imports from three key U.S. trading partners, Mexico, Canada, and China. The tariffs, which are set to take effect on February 1, 2025, include a 25% levy on goods from Mexico and Canada and a 10% tariff on imports from China. The administration justified these measures by linking them to the ongoing illegal fentanyl crisis and arguing that they would encourage cooperation from these nations in addressing drug trafficking and immigration issues. Economic context and implications. The tariffs are expected to have widespread implications for American consumers and the economy. Economic analysts have warned that the new measures could lead to sharp price increases on essential goods including gasoline vehicles and groceries. Projections from economic experts suggest that if fully implemented, consumer price inflation could rise by 3 to 4%. Exacerbating the already precarious economic situation following years of recovery efforts. The trade deficit with Canada and Mexico has also surged significantly in recent years, with the U.S. trade deficit with Canada rising from $31 billion in 2019 to $72 billion in 2023, and with Mexico from $106 billion to $161 billion over the same period. Rationale behind the tariffs. During his announcement, Trump emphasized that these tariffs were not merely economic measures but were also rooted in a broader strategy of using trade policy as a tool of foreign policy. The White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt reiterated that the tariffs were intended to compel Canada and Mexico to take more decisive actions against illegal immigration and drug smuggling. The administration has historically used tariff threats as leverage in negotiations. Citing a recent example where it pressured Colombia into accepting deportations of unauthorized immigrants in exchange for tariff concessions. Potential retaliation and diplomatic fallout. The announcement of these tariffs has raised concerns about immediate retaliation from Canada and Mexico. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum both indicated that their countries are prepared to respond to the U.S. tariffs. Trudeau stated that Canada would implement a forceful but reasonable response, while Sheinbaum emphasized Mexico's commitment to defending its sovereignty and economic interests. Economic experts anticipate that Canada may impose a similar 25% tariff on U.S. imports, while Mexico might target agricultural imports rather than manufacturing goods to minimize damage to its own economy. Market reactions and consumer impact. The stock market reacted negatively to the tariff announcement, with the S&P 500 index experiencing a notable decline. Reflecting investor concerns over potential economic disruptions and retaliatory measures that could escalate into a broader trade conflict. Economists have pointed out that tariffs typically lead to higher costs for consumers, as businesses often pass on increased costs to customers to maintain profit margins. The cascading effect of tariffs on the economy, particularly in sectors like energy, automotive, and agriculture, could lead to a significant rise in the cost of living for American families. Broader implications for U.S. trade policy. This announcement marks a pivotal moment in U.S. trade policy under Trump's administration, which has taken a protectionist stance reminiscent of his first term in office. The administration's approach highlights a transactional view of trade relations, where tariffs are wielded as tools to achieve political and economic concessions from allies and adversaries alike. Observers have noted that such a strategy could have lasting implications for U.S. relations with its closest neighbors and major trading partners, potentially undermining longstanding alliances and partnerships. Conclusion. Trump's announcement of immediate tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China signifies a dramatic escalation in U.S. trade policy with significant repercussions for both domestic consumers and international relations. As the tariffs go into effect, the potential for retaliatory measures and broader economic fallout looms large, raising questions about the long-term sustainability of such an aggressive trade strategy. The coming days will likely see heightened tensions as affected nations respond and as the U.S. economy grapples with the potential consequences of these new tariffs. Counterintuitive information. 1. Targeting allies versus competitors. President Trump is targeting Canada and Mexico, traditionally considered allies with significant tariffs. This contrasts with the expectation that a trade war would primarily target economic competitors like China. The approach appears to undermine long-standing alliances while potentially strengthening adversarial relationships with countries like China, which could lead to increased geopolitical tensions. 2. Inflation versus economic growth. While Trump claims that implementing tariffs would protect American workers and boost domestic manufacturing, many economists predict that the tariffs will lead to higher prices for consumers, thereby reigniting inflation. This contradicts the administration's narrative that tariffs are a solution to economic woes, as higher consumer prices can lead to decreased purchasing power and overall economic slowdown. 3. Retaliation expectations. The expectation of retaliation from Canada and Mexico may seem intuitive, however, the specific implications suggest a complex scenario. Economists predict that retaliation from Mexico may focus on agricultural imports rather than manufactured goods, potentially harming U.S. farmers more than manufacturers. This counterintuitive twist highlights how tariffs can backfire, affecting different sectors in unexpected ways. For fentanyl trade justification, the tariffs are justified by the administration as a means to combat the illegal fentanyl crisis and curb illegal immigration. However, the reality is that the vast majority of fentanyl entering the U.S. does not originate from Canada, which raises questions about the effectiveness of using tariffs as a tool to address these issues. This inconsistency suggests a disconnect between the stated goals and the actual impact of the policies. 5. Economic damage to U.S. The assertion that tariffs will protect U.S. interests overlooks the potential for significant economic damage not only to the targeted countries but also to the U.S. economy itself. Studies indicate that a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada could have catastrophic consequences for those economies and could ironically increase the incentives for illegal immigration, which is a primary concern of the Trump administration. 6. Negotiation strategy. The administration's strategy of using tariffs as leverage for negotiation may seem effective, as seen with Colombia. However, the stakes involved with Canada and Mexico are much higher, raising the potential for a broader trade conflict that could destabilize the North American economy. This suggests that the transactional approach to diplomacy may lead to unintended consequences that outweigh any immediate benefits. 7. Oil tariff exemptions. Trump's consideration of a lower tariff rate on oil imports from Canada and Mexico stands in contrast to the overall punitive stance of the tariffs. This selective application not only complicates the economic landscape but also implies a recognition of the interdependence in energy markets that may conflict with the broader message of economic isolationism. 8. Consumer price expectations. The administration's approach to incremental tariff increases is claimed to be less inflationary, however. Economists argue that such a strategy could actually lead to higher inflation expectations. This contradiction highlights a potential misunderstanding of economic principles, where gradual price increases might create more sustained inflationary pressures rather than dampen them. These counterintuitive points illustrate the complexities and potential pitfalls of the policies being proposed, challenging the straightforward narrative of using tariffs as a tool for economic and foreign policy. The report on President Trump's announcement of tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China reveals several critical aspects that may be easily overlooked but are significant in understanding the broader implications of this trade policy shift. 1. Economic rationale versus political strategy. While the stated justification for the tariffs is to combat illegal fentanyl trafficking and encourage cooperation on immigration, the underlying economic rationale is deeply intertwined with political strategy. Trump is leveraging tariffs as a tool not only for economic protectionism but also to assert control over trade negotiations. This approach reflects a broader trend in his administration, where economic measures are used as bargaining chips in diplomatic relations. Analysts note that previous tariff threats have been effective in securing concessions from other nations, such as in the case of Colombia. The significance lies in recognizing that these tariffs are not merely economic decisions, they are strategic moves aimed at reshaping international relations and asserting U.S. dominance. 2. Potential for retaliation and escalation of trade conflicts. The likelihood of retaliatory tariffs from Canada and Mexico is a crucial aspect often underestimated. Both countries have indicated readiness to respond to U.S. tariffs, which could lead to a tit-for-tat escalation. This dynamic poses a risk not only to bilateral trade relationships but also to global supply chains. The potential for a broader trade conflict, one that could adversely affect multiple sectors including agriculture, energy and manufacturing, is significant. Notably, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's comments on the disastrous consequences of such tariffs highlight the potential for geopolitical instability. The implications of escalating trade tensions could reverberate through the global economy, affecting consumer prices and economic growth far beyond the initial tariffs. 3. Impact on consumer prices and inflation. While the report mentions the expected rise in consumer prices due to the tariffs, the broader inflationary impact may not receive sufficient emphasis. Economic experts predict that full implementation of the tariffs could lead to a 3 to 4% increase in consumer price inflation. This inflationary pressure could disproportionately affect middle-class families already facing economic strain. The connection between tariffs, price increases, and inflation is crucial for understanding the potential long-term economic consequences of this policy. The idea that gradual tariff increases might be less inflationary is challenged by experts who argue that such measures could inadvertently raise inflation expectations and lead to a more volatile economic environment. 4. Domestic economic consequences and manufacturing. The tariffs are portrayed as a means to protect American workers and boost domestic manufacturing. However, the reality of how tariffs impact domestic industries is complex. While some sectors may benefit, others could suffer from increased costs and disrupted supply chains. The automotive and agricultural sectors are particularly vulnerable, and the potential for job losses in these industries may not be adequately addressed. The expectation that tariffs will lead to a resurgence in domestic production overlooks the nuanced realities of global supply chains and the interconnectedness of modern economies. 5. Legal authority and implications of rapid implementation. The legal framework under which these tariffs are enacted is significant, particularly the reference to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This act allows for rapid implementation of economic measures under claims of national emergency. The implications of such authority being used for trade policy raise questions about the balance of power in economic governance and the potential for executive overreach. The swift nature of implementation also suggests a strategy to minimize pushback from Congress or other stakeholders, which could set a concerning precedent for future trade policy decisions. 6. Long-term strategic vision versus immediate gains. Trump's approach to tariffs reflects a long-term strategic vision that prioritizes immediate political gains over potential long-term economic stability. The transactional nature of his trade policy raises concerns about the sustainability of such an approach. Critics argue that this method could lead to entrenched trade conflicts that ultimately harm the U.S. economy and its global standing. The significant focus on short-term negotiating tactics may overshadow the importance of building lasting trade relationships based on mutual benefit and cooperation. Conclusion. In summary, while the announcement of tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China is significant in its immediate economic implications, the broader context reveals deeper strategic, political, and economic ramifications that could shape U.S. trade policy and international relations for years to come. The interplay between political motivations, consumer impacts, potential retaliatory actions, and legal frameworks creates a complex landscape that warrants careful attention beyond the headline figures. Understanding these nuances is critical for stakeholders across the spectrum, from policymakers to consumers and businesses alike. 1. Economic implications of tariffs. The immediate implementation of 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, along with a 10% tariff on Chinese goods, is projected to lead to significant price increases for a wide array of consumer goods. Analysts anticipate that consumer price inflation could rise by 3 to 4% if these tariffs are fully enacted. This economic strain could particularly affect essential items like gasoline vehicles and groceries, raising concerns about the potential for a renewed inflationary environment that could disrupt overall economic growth. 2. Strategic use of trade policy. President Trump's tariffs are justified primarily as a response to the illegal fentanyl crisis and to compel cooperation on immigration and trade issues. This reflects a broader strategy of leveraging trade policy as both an economic and diplomatic tool. The administration's approach indicates a transactional perspective on trade relations where tariffs are used not just for economic reasons but as instruments to secure political concessions from trading partners. 3. Retaliation and trade conflict risks. The likelihood of retaliatory measures from Canada and Mexico is a significant concern. Economic experts predict that both countries will respond with their own tariffs, which could escalate into a trade conflict detrimental to all involved. This potential retaliation could disrupt supply chains and further harm U.S. consumers, highlighting the interconnectedness of trade relations and the risks associated with aggressive tariff policies. 4. Legal and political framework. The legal authority for imposing these tariffs may stem from the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, allowing for swift action. However, this approach raises political risks for Trump as many voters are concerned about the inflationary effects of tariffs. Critics argue that targeting allies like Canada and Mexico may be counterproductive, ultimately harming U.S. economic interests and relationships with essential trading partners. The political ramifications of these decisions could influence Trump's administration as it navigates the complexities of domestic and international responses to the tariffs. 1. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act 1930. This legislation raised tariffs on hundreds of imports aiming to protect American industries during the Great Depression. The tariffs led to retaliatory measures from other countries, exacerbating the global economic downturn and significantly reducing international trade. As a result, many economists believe it deepened and prolonged the economic hardship of the time. 2. U.S.-China Trade War 2018-present. Beginning in 2018, the U.S. imposed tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, citing unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China responded with tariffs on U.S. products, leading to a tit-for-tat trade conflict that impacted global supply chains, U.S. consumers, and agricultural sectors. The trade war's repercussions continue to influence international relations and economic policies. 3. NAFTA and its renegotiation 2017 to 2018. While initially aimed at reducing trade barriers between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, the North American Free Trade Agreement NAFTA faced criticism for contributing to manufacturing job losses in the U.S. In 2018, it was renegotiated into the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement USMCA with new provisions to address trade imbalances, labor rights, and environmental standards, reflecting ongoing tensions and the need for updated trade agreements in response to changing economic conditions. Future outlook: predictions for the impact of Trump's tariffs on trade relations and the U.S. economy. The recent announcement by President Donald Trump to impose immediate tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China will likely have far-reaching consequences for international trade and the U.S. economy. As these tariffs take effect, several potential outcomes can be anticipated based on historical precedents, economic theory, and the current geopolitical landscape. 1. Escalation of trade conflicts. The imposition of 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada alongside a 10% tariff on Chinese goods is expected to trigger retaliatory measures from these nations. Both Canada and Mexico have indicated their readiness to respond with their own tariffs, which can lead to an escalating cycle of trade conflict. This tit-for-tat approach is reminiscent of the trade wars initiated during Trump's first term, which resulted in significant economic disruptions. Economists predict that if retaliatory tariffs are implemented, they could impact a wide range of industries, including agriculture, automotive, and consumer goods, potentially leading to a full-blown trade war. 2. Inflationary pressures. The tariffs are likely to exacerbate inflation in the U.S. economy. Economic analysts have warned that consumer prices could rise by 3 to 4% if the tariffs are fully enacted. This is particularly concerning as inflation has already been a critical issue for American consumers. As companies pass on the increased costs of imported goods to consumers, everyday items such as groceries, gasoline, and vehicles could become significantly more expensive. The resulting financial strain on households could lead to decreased consumer spending, further impacting economic growth. 3. Supply chain disruptions. The introduction of tariffs could also disrupt existing supply chains, especially in industries that rely heavily on imports from the affected countries. Companies may face challenges in sourcing materials and components at competitive prices, leading to increased production costs and delays. This disruption may force businesses to seek alternative suppliers, potentially from regions with higher costs, thereby compounding inflationary pressures and reducing overall efficiency in production. 4. Impact on domestic manufacturing. While Trump has framed these tariffs as a means to bolster American manufacturing, the reality may be more complex. Short-term boosts to certain domestic industries might be observed as companies pivot to local sourcing to avoid tariffs. However, the longer-term effects could be detrimental if trade partners retaliate, leading to a decline in exports of U.S. goods. Industries that rely on export markets, such as agriculture and manufacturing, could suffer significant losses, undermining the intended objectives of the tariffs. 5. Political ramifications. The tariffs could have substantial political implications for the Trump administration. As inflation rises and consumer prices increase, public discontent may grow. This discontent could manifest in the midterm elections and impact Trump's political capital. Furthermore, alienating key trade partners like Canada and Mexico, which are crucial allies, might have broader geopolitical consequences that extend beyond economics, affecting diplomatic relations and regional cooperation. 6. Long-term trade policy shifts. The current approach to trade, characterized by unilateral action and protectionism, may lead to a re-evaluation of international trade policies. If the tariffs result in severe economic repercussions, there could be pressure from both political parties to adopt a more collaborative and multilateral approach to trade negotiations. Future administrations may seek to rebuild relationships with allies, focusing on collective solutions to trade issues rather than confrontational tactics. 7. Global economic impact. The tariffs on key global economies are likely to create ripple effects throughout the international market. Countries that rely on exports to the U.S. could see economic slowdowns, leading to reduced demand for their goods and services. This interconnectedness means that economic instability in one region can adversely affect global economic growth, potentially leading to a recession in interconnected economies. 8. Negotiation leverage. On the other hand, Trump may utilize these tariffs as leverage in broader trade negotiations. By applying pressure on Mexico, Canada, and China, he could potentially achieve concessions in other areas such as immigration policy or trade agreements. However, this strategy is risky and could backfire if it leads to entrenched positions from the affected countries rather than cooperative solutions. In conclusion, the immediate ramifications of Trump's tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China are poised to create a volatile economic environment characterized by inflation, retaliatory trade measures, and potential long-term shifts in U.S. trade policy. As these developments unfold, both domestic and international stakeholders will need to navigate a complex landscape of economic challenges and political consequences. The outcome of this strategy will hinge on the responses from the affected nations and the broader global economic environment in the coming months and years.